Today, I'm announcing that Canada will be the first country to revoke Russia's and Belarus's most favored nation status as a trading partner under Canadian law. We are working closely with our partners and allies to encourage them to take the same step. Simply put, this means that Russia and Belarus will no longer receive the benefits, particularly low tariffs, that Canada offers to other countries that are fellow members of the WTO. Instead, Russia and Belarus will be subject to a tariff of 35% on their exports to Canada. The only other country that does not enjoy MFN status with Canada is North Korea. Last night, we also announced that Canada will sanction 10 executives from Rosneft, Russia's leading oil company, and from Gazprom, a major Russian state-owned energy company. This will bring the total number of people and entities sanctioned, or in the process of being sanctioned, by Canada since Russia's illegal occupation of Crimea in 2014 to more than 1,000. Comme nous le disons depuis le début de l'invasion barbare de l'Ukraine par la Russie, nous ferons tout ce qui est en notre pouvoir
in our power to make sure that President Putin, his accomplices, those who allow him to do so, and the Russian economy pay the price for this grave historical mistake. We cannot allow him to succeed, and we will not. President Putin has chosen to invade a sovereign democracy and attack the rules-based international order with a massive blow. The same order that has brought us a period of unprecedented economic prosperity. Members of the Russian financial elite may believe that their close ties to Western boardrooms and yacht clubs will protect them, but they're wrong. We will not let Russians and Russian institutions that are central to President Putin's fallen kleptocracy enjoy this prosperity, whose very foundations are under threat.
The G7 has already imposed the strongest sanctions ever inflicted on a major economy, on Russia, and more will follow in the days to come. The ruble has been down by as much as 30% this week. On Monday, Russia's central bank raised its benchmark interest rate to 20%. The Russian stock market is closed today for the fourth consecutive day. Moody's and Fitch have now downgraded Russian government debt to junk status. The economic costs of the Kremlin's barbaric war are already high, and they will continue to rise. Le Canada et ses alliés sont unis.
Canada and its allies are united in condemning President Putin and his war of aggression. And we are united in our support for the remarkable Ukrainian people who are so courageously resisting his assault. For more details on our support for the Ukrainian people, I turn the floor over to my colleague, the Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, Sean Fraser.
And Sean, now over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon or good morning, bon matin. Canada is ready to welcome Ukrainians fleeing Vladimir Putin's war, and there is no limit to the number of applications that we are going to be willing to accept.
Canada will welcome Ukrainians seeking to flee Vladimir Putin's war.
It goes beyond the historic ties between Canada and Ukraine. It goes beyond the cultural connections between our people. I can't help but think that centuries from now, historians will be writing of the courage on display in Ukraine today, from the fearless leadership of President Zelensky to the young fathers with tears in their eyes delivering their children to safety before they return to the front lines to fight in a war that they never wanted but know that they have to win, to the unarmed grandmothers confronting Russian soldiers, telling them that they ought to place seeds in their pockets so that sunflowers may grow while their bodies rest on Ukrainian soil. These are the stories of courage and the stories of heroes that are going to be told for generations to come. Ce qui justifie notre engagement.
The reason we are committed to offering refuge to Ukrainians who seek it is that by opposing Putin's tyranny and oppression, they are advancing the democratic values in Ukraine that define us as Canadians.
We believe in the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity of nations. We believe in the right of peoples to self-determination. These are the values that underpin the founding documents of the United Nations and form the basis of the international rules-based legal order that has helped deliver peace and prosperity to Canadians for the better part of a century. But if we fail to breathe life into these important texts by choosing not to defend the principles behind the documents when they are under attack, then they are worth no more than the paper on which they are written. That's why we're launching 2 new special programs for Ukrainians who want to come to Canada temporarily and for those who wish to stay. For those who need a safe haven while the war ravages their homeland, we are creating the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel.
For those who wish to come to Canada while the war ravages their homeland, we are creating the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel.
No limit on the number of applications accepted under this stream. The primary motivation for this new program is that it provides the fastest way for us to start welcoming as many Ukrainians as possible and will allow them to stay for a period of up to 2 years. We're waiving most of the requirements that exist under a traditional visa. In order to qualify, individuals will need to complete a simple application form and provide biometrics for security and background screening. To help ensure this process can be executed in a timely way, we started moving biometric kits and other materials to the region in mid-January. This means that we have both the equipment and personnel in place to take biometrics in Warsaw, Vienna, and Bucharest, in addition to 30 other locations throughout Europe. We're ready to extend hours of operation and add more staff as needed, where needed. Everyone who arrives under this new stream will also be eligible for an open work permit or study permit that will allow them to take a job with any Canadian employer or enroll in an education program.
And as previously announced, IRCC will also issue open work permits to Ukrainian visitors, workers, and students who are currently in Canada and cannot return home.
We'll also be waiving application fees to remove the additional financial burden for families. Any Canadian employer willing to hire Ukrainians may do so, and I encourage the Canadian business community to step up and do their part to help support those coming into Canada in their time of need. And I want to say thank you to the employers who've already reached out saying that you want to do your part. I've heard from the Ukrainian Canadian community that many fleeing the violence will want to return to their homeland and to their families when the war comes to an end. I've heard that others, particularly those with family in Canada, may wish to stay. That is why we are also introducing an expedited path to permanent residency for Ukrainians seeking to reunite with family members who are already in Canada through a new family sponsorship program.
That is why we are also introducing an expedited path to permanent residency for Ukrainians seeking to reunite with their family members who are already in Canada.
This program will allow a wider circle of family members to be resettled in Canada compared to traditional family reunification streams. We're going to be working closely with members of the Ukrainian Canadian community and the Ukrainian Canadian Congress in particular to finalize the details of this new program in the coming weeks. More than a month ago, we also moved to implement priority processing for Ukrainians who wish to reunite with family, study, work, or start a new life here in Canada.
And since January, IRCC has received over 6,000 Ukrainians in Canada under various programs. We have also launched a dedicated immigration hotline and online application form for Ukraine available in Canada and abroad to respond to immigration requests so that applicants can get help more quickly. To those Ukrainians who are ready to give their lives to defend the values we hold dear, we stand with you. not only in our words, but also in our actions.
We are unwavering in our commitment to do whatever it takes, as long as it takes, to help you succeed in your efforts to win this war. We will provide equipment to help defend your homeland. We will provide financial support to help stabilize your economy. We will impose economic sanctions on your oppressor. And today, we will offer safe haven to your families while you fight on the front lines of a war to defend your freedom from tyranny to the benefit of the entire world. Thank you. Merci tout le monde. Slava Ukraini.
And I think it's over to the Minister of Defense, Anita Anand, now.
Merci beaucoup, Christian.
Thank you, Christia.
Good morning, bonjour tout le monde. It has been just over 1 week since Russia further invaded and brutally attacked Ukraine. 1 week of witnessing the horrific consequences of Putin's unprovoked war on innocent people, and 1 week of unshakable courage for our Ukrainian friends. While Putin's attacks have steadily intensified, so has our military support for Ukraine in coordination with our allies. We will leave no stone unturned when it comes to supporting our friends in Ukraine as they fight for their lives and their right to exist. To this end, I am announcing today, in addition to the various tranches of military equipment that we have pledged to in the last 30 days, 2 new significant contributions. First, we intend to supply additional lethal aid to Ukraine, which includes up to 4,500 M72 rocket launchers and up to 7,500 hand grenades. These weapons will be drawn from the Canadian Armed Forces' existing stockpiles and will be transported to the region as quickly and safely as possible. Given the nature of the conflict, we are not providing details relating to transit. Second, we will be providing Ukraine with $1 million towards the purchase of high-resolution, modern satellite imagery. This capability will provide Ukraine's military with a strengthened ability to monitor the movement of Russian forces in and around their territory. Nous n'allons rien négliger pour soutenir.
We will do everything that we can to support our Ukrainian friends who are fighting for their lives and their right to exist. And so I am announcing that beyond the military equipment that we are committed to sending to Ukraine, and which we have sent in the previous 30 days, we have 2 new important contributions. Firstly, we will be sending additional lethal aid to Ukraine, up to 4,500 rocket launchers and up to 7,500 hand grenades. These weapons will come from existing stockpiles of the Canadian Armed Forces and will be sent to the region as quickly and safely as possible. Secondly, we will also be giving the Ukraine $1 million for the purchase of high-resolution modern satellite imagery. This will allow the Ukrainian military to better surveil the movements of the Russian forces in and outside their territory.
Choices in the measures we take are informed by constant conversations with our allies and with Ukraine. I am in daily contact also with Minister Resnikov, and yesterday I spoke with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and the defense ministers of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. As we see the horrific impacts of Putin's aggression, we must continue to remember that our allies and partners are united and that we are going to keep adding to the measures to support Ukraine's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. La brutalité des impacts que nous voyons sur nos écrans
The brutality of what we're seeing on our screens is angering everyone. A more violent conflict is not what Ukraine, Canada, and the rest of the world want or need. We want peace in the region and the restoration of the world order. That is our goal, and that is the goal of our partners and allies.
Putin knows what Putin will do, and it is our job to do everything we can to protect as many lives as possible together with our NATO allies. As the Minister of National Defense, my commitment, our government's commitment, is to continue to do exactly that in the hours, days, and weeks to come. Slava Ukraini. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Miigwech.
Okay, we're going to get started with questions in the room. One question, one follow. Rachel?
Hi, Ministers. Rachel Haynes from CTV National News. My question is for Minister Freeland about the sanctions. You talked about how the G7 has already issued some of the strongest sanctions and that there are more to come. However, other G7 allies have come under fire for not doing enough to sanction individuals like Boris Johnson in the UK. Are you noticing any type of impact that these sanctions are actually having on Vladimir Putin's behavior? As we're seeing, there has been a bombardment of all these cities, hospitals, and increased shelling in Kyiv. Are these sanctions actually having an impact?
The sanctions are absolutely having an impact, and that's why I outlined in my remarks the very significant impact our measures are having directly on the Russian economy. So, ruble down 30%, interest rates up to 20%, Fitch and Moody's downgrading Russian debt to junk. The stock exchange closed for the 4th day in a row. This is a significant and direct impact which is already being felt by every single person in Russia. And that's a really big deal because let's remember the toughest measures only came into force on Monday morning. When it comes to the individuals, the oligarchs and the people in Putin's inner circle who are being sanctioned, this is definitely having an impact as well. These are people who have tried to have it both ways for a long time. They're people who have been hangers-on of Vladimir Putin, his sycophants, his enablers, as he has become more and more of a threat to the world. But at the same time, they have enjoyed a pretty fabulous lifestyle in the West with yachts and mansions and having their kids at the fanciest universities and private schools. And what we've done with these measures, much more forcefully than the Russian elite anticipated, is we have said, you know what? You have to pick sides. And I can tell you it is having an impact. And one concrete way that we are seeing that impact is some of the oligarchs are starting to speak out. If that's what they're saying in public, imagine what conversations are happening within the Kremlin and inside Russia, and that's exactly what needs to happen. And, I do want the Russian leadership to understand, Russian oligarchs to understand, we're going to keep on going. There is a tremendous willingness among the world's democracies to just continue ratcheting up the pressure. And as I hope the Russian leadership has seen, we are being very creative. We are using tools which no one would even have imagined deploying just a week ago, and there's more to come.
What kind of conversations have you been having with your allies, or I'm sure you probably won't go into specifics in public.
Probably not.
You normally tell us you don't like to tell us your negotiations in public, but in terms of the UK specifically, where there have been calls for them to do more, have you had any direct conversations with your counterparts in the UK about doing more?
100%. Yeah, I am in close touch with Chancellor Rishi Sunak. I spoke to him over the weekend. He and I text each other several times a day. And of course, he and I were both at the G7 finance ministers meeting early on Tuesday morning. And we had a quick follow-up phone call, the two of us afterwards, to talk about follow-on actions. I really believe, and I think we see this in the actions, that all of our G7 partners are extremely resolute and determined to continue ratcheting up the pressure. There is a real unity of will, unity of commitment, and that's a good thing. It's necessary.
Bonjour, Raymond Fillon de TVA. Madame Freeland.
Raymond Fillon from TVA. Ms. Freeland, when we're talking about tariffs of up to 35% on Russian imports, will that have an impact on prices that Canadians pay for certain goods? Would it be penalizing Canadians? Answer. To tell you the truth, the impact to Canadians and Canada will be minimal. Canada made a smart move after the invasion of Crimea. We started imposing serious sanctions against Russia, and our government put in place a policy while I was Minister for Foreign Affairs was to not encourage Canadian companies, foreign trade rather, was to tell Canadian companies to not be active in Russia. It was a decisive move because our government and I thought that we would be putting pressure on Russia. It would be an economic risk for Canada and Canadian companies to have closer ties with Russia. So, with regards to G7 countries, Canada has the loosest ties with Russia, and we are well positioned and strategically positioned in our economy. And it was our intention to act that way, and I am pleased that we can now impose significant sanctions without truly impacting Canadians. So it's an economic war against Russia right now, correct? Answer. I think that we can say that we are taking strong measures that are stronger than ever before, and that we will continue to do so.
Yasmine Midi avec Radio-Canada.
Yasmine Midi, Radio-Canada. Just to add on to what my colleague said, for a week you've been announcing sanctions to put pressure on Vladimir Putin. Is Canada's goal to change the regime in Russia? Answer. Internal affairs in Russia is an issue for Russians. Canada's goal is to change its foreign policy with Russia. It's to put an end to the illegal and barbaric war that Russia has waged against Ukraine. It's important for us to show to the Russian leaders and elites and to the Russian people that they cannot wage war against the international order and, at the same time, be a part of the prosperity created by that order. That's what we're showing that there are consequences. And it's very important for Russia to understand that these consequences will become more and more severe. There are people in Russia who have started criticizing this barbaric war. I think it is important to respect those Russian people. They are brave. It is not an easy thing to do when you live in a dictatorship to criticize what is going on. And I would like to say to those courageous Russian people, to those moral Russian people, that we are thankful for what they're doing, and it is very important. A follow-up question. On immigration, you have announced 2 programs today, but you've not announced removing visas completely for Ukrainians. Can you tell us why? Is it a security risk? Answer. I will answer quickly, and then I will give the floor to the Minister of Immigration. I would like to say that I know that Canadians want to welcome Ukrainians. I know that because it's impossible for me to read my emails. People know that I have Ukrainian heritage, and everyone that I know has sent me an email saying that I have space in my home to welcome 10 Ukrainians. I have enough space for 20 Ukrainians. My company would love to give jobs to Ukrainians. There's a strong Canadian support, and it's amazing. We are a great country. And I was very encouraged to see Canada's response, Canadians' response. What the Minister of Immigration announced today will allow Canada to efficiently and quickly welcome a lot of Ukrainians. That is what Canadians want, and that's what our government is going to help do. But with that said, I will give the floor to Sean.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for your question. We implemented a simplified process that will help us welcome the Ukrainians that are fleeing the war, and we will welcome them safely.
In English, look, let me first build upon the comments that Minister Freeland just shared. The first reaction was when my phone was blown up. I saw a text from my mom. Mom said she'd take 6. There are thousands of communities filled with moms like that, filled with businesses, filled with organizations that want to help. My primary motivation was speed. My first reaction when I saw that there was a potential influx of Ukrainians who would be seeking safe haven was to figure out what can Canada do? Can we offer a refugee resettlement process? When I dug in on that, I very quickly realized that it would take potentially years to settle people as refugees. And I was hearing from the Ukrainian community that people wanted to come potentially temporarily, not as refugees. My second reaction was to look at a visa waiver. When I actually examined the mechanics that would be required to implement it, I discovered very quickly it was going to require particular regulatory changes and certain renovations to our IT system, both internal to our department and with airlines, to actually recognize through the electronic travel authorization program we have for other countries that have visa-free travel. And it was going to take 12 to 14 weeks. We don't have 12 to 14 weeks. We're going to be able to stand up the new program I've announced today much quicker than that and start welcoming people in a more expeditious way. I should point out as well that we do want to make sure that Canadians have faith we can manage this in a professional way that protects our security, as you've suggested. when we made the decision to welcome an unlimited number of applications, we also have to recognize that Canadians want to know that we're doing it in a responsible way. So those are the reasons, primarily speed, but also making sure Canadians have faith we're doing this in the safest possible way.
I got to go to the Zoom line. I'm sorry, because if we can keep the answers tight, then we can maybe come back to the room, but I got to go to the Zoom. So first up is Stephen Chase, Globe and Mail.
Hi, Steve Chase here, Globe and Mail. I just want to follow up on my colleague's question. Why didn't you, the main feature of a visa application that I'm interested in is that it requires a security check. And I'm assuming that's part of the reason why you kept the visa requirement in place, even though there's 60 other countries and jurisdictions that get visa-free access to this country. Who are you worried about getting to this country if there was no security check? That is, are you worried about certain, people who may be misrepresenting themselves and using visa-free access to get to Canada if you were to drop that visa requirement?
Look, thanks very much for the question. And I think just to reiterate, when you do have a complete visa waiver, that means that everyone can come who is a Ukrainian national. It also opens the door for others who might slip through the cracks. We've heard concerns about certain individuals, such as those who've supported and fought against the Ukrainian army in Putin's war for the past 8 years in the Donbass, as well as those who are currently working against Ukraine and assisting Russian troops. By having the biometric analysis, we're going to be able to screen out those, as is the case with all of our Five Eyes intelligence partners. But we've been prepared to deal with this, and we started moving additional biometric kits into the region more than a month ago to make sure that we have the capacity to do this. I anticipate that we're going to be able to process people in large numbers in a very expeditious way and still protect against that security risk of the people who've actually been fighting against Ukrainians for the past 8 years.
And I will just relinquish my follow-up so we can go on.
Okay, next up is Boris Prou, Le Devoir.
Bonjour, ma question s'adresse aussi au
My question is also for Minister Fraser. I would like to know, could you explain exactly what will change in the process? If I understand, there will be a visa, but perhaps less documentation to give. Can you offer specifics, please?
Oui, merci pour la question.
Answer, yes. Thank you for the question, and I will answer in English.
Because I want to get the details accurately. So there's essentially two things in the process that'll be required. One, a simple application form, and two, biometrics. Normally, there would be additional documents that would be required, and we've tried to pull a program off the shelf similar to our temporary visa program and erode as many of the administrative barriers as possible so we can make it easier to get into the program and make it quicker to process. In addition, people will be eligible for an open work permit when they arrive. There will be no requirement for a labor market impact assessment. There will be no consideration of NOP codes. There will be no consideration of language requirements. You'll be able to work and study as part of this program after you arrive too. So we've essentially tried to look at our programs that allow people to travel to Canada and allow them to work and paired off as many administrative barriers as possible. So you just need to submit the application form and then submit your biometrics, and then we can deal with other elements after you're in Canada to the extent it may be necessary.
Merci. En suivi, est-ce que
Thank you. And for a follow-up question, and will forms sent in, new forms sent in as of today be accepted as of today? And how many Ukrainians will be able to send in a request according to your department?
I'll answer your questions in reverse order. So first, there is no limit to the number of applications that we are willing to accept. The reason that we chose this particular pathway is it's the same system that we currently use to process in excess of 2 million applications for temporary visas a year. It's the area where we have the greatest horsepower and the fewest administrative requirements that's going to allow us to process whatever demand we see. The application process is probably going to open in about 14 days, but I should reiterate that the existing temporary residence visa application form is open, and when we see any applications from a Ukrainian national, we have been pulling them out and processing them first since January 19th. Since January, as of yesterday, there were 6,131 Ukrainians that had already arrived in Canada. We have been working very hard to make it as quick as possible, and if there is an application not just for permanent residency or temporary residency, but for proof of citizenship, for study permits, for work permits, any application in IRCC system that is attached to a Ukrainian national has been prioritized on a priority basis since January 19th, and we're going to continue to do that up until the moment the new application system goes live.
Okay, next on the Zoom line, we're going to go with David Aiken from Global News.
Thank you very much. My question for Minister Freeland. Minister, lots of members of the gallery, most members of the press outside our country have been writing about your unique, I don't know, I call like heritage, attributes in helping to mobilize sort of the international alliance against this. I wonder if you might speak a little bit about that, your ability to speak. You're probably the only G20, I assume, foreign minister that speaks Ukrainian, that has that background in Russia. Could you reflect a little bit about that bit of you in dealing with this particular crisis?
I don't really want to, David, because I think our focus should be on the really, really brave people of Ukraine. And I think they are the ones who have turned this around. I think that when it turned out that Western deterrence efforts hadn't worked, and when Putin launched his barbaric attack on Ukraine a week ago, just over a week ago, the sort of mainstream expert prediction was that Ukraine would fall, and it would fall very quickly. And the Ukrainians proved everybody to be wrong, starting with President Zelensky and I think it's going to go down in his historic line, "I need ammo, not a ride." And what we are seeing across Ukraine is a very, very determined people who have decided they're willing to fight and die for democracy and for freedom. And I think that incredibly brave, incredibly spirited resistance has inspired the West. I think the Ukrainians are the leaders now. And, I think you could say maybe the Western democracies, maybe we were kind of losing our mojo. We were getting a little bit cynical about whether democracy really works. We were getting a little bit cynical about whether regular people really care about democracy and freedom. I think maybe we were getting a little bit cynical about the ability of democracies to act together quickly and in a united way. And I think Putin was counting on that. I think Putin and Russian disinformation actually for years now has been trying to make us in the West cynical about democracy. And I think he thought his campaign had been working. And I think maybe some of us thought that too. And I think, and I speak for myself, but I've heard this from many leaders of other Western countries and non-Western countries too. The Kenyan UN ambassador made a remarkable statement. And I've heard it from lots of Canadians. I think seeing the Ukrainians stand up and say, we may be smaller than you, you may have a fierce army that is bigger than ours, but we will not submit. I think that that is what has been transformative. And I'm very proud of them. I'm very inspired by the people of Ukraine. And I think the whole world is.
Thanks for that. Maybe a quick follow-up. I wonder if you could speak to what I'll call the arc of international enthusiasm to apply sanctions. We saw it was a little slower maybe to get everybody with the SWIFT, some of the banking actions. Today you've announced revoking most favored nation status by Canada. Would you expect our international partners to be enthusiastic about implying that?
Yeah. You know, David, one of my favorite lines in literature is Ernest Hemingway's line about someone going broke. And he talks about how it happens gradually, then all of a sudden. And I think in human affairs, certainly in geopolitics and in domestic politics, you sometimes reach a tipping point. And when you reach that tipping point, things that were previously impossible become possible. I personally observed that tipping point when I was young as a reporter covering the collapse of the Soviet Union in Ukraine and then in Russia. And you know, for someone who grew up in like a super stable Canada, hard to imagine a more stable, some people might even say more boring country than ours. I consider that a compliment. It's very good to live in a stable, sometimes boring country. Sort of seeing that incredibly swift transformation and seeing how every day what had been considered impossible the day before suddenly became possible. I remember that experience very clearly, and the past week has reminded me of that. I have seen, you know, when it comes to the sanctions, the economic measures, we talked about a lot of stuff leading up to Putin's invasion. And, you know, I would say the base assumption was we're going to try deterrence. But if deterrence doesn't work, if we don't persuade Putin not to do this, then, you know, Ukraine is probably lost. I think that was the basic assumption. And what's happened now is everyone is up for everything. And I think it's because the Ukrainians have given us all hope that they might actually hang in there. And so seeing them fight so bravely makes the rest of us think, gee, like the least we can do is use the strongest possible economic tools we have, is have our Minister of Defense and her colleagues supply all of the weapons that Ukrainians need, and have Sean and his colleagues take care of the Ukrainians who have to flee Ukraine. So I do think, David, I think there has been a transformation. It's an entirely different atmosphere. Instead of countries talking about reasons that something is too hard to do, there is now a real creativity in the meetings, and people are kind of saying, hey, what about this? And then someone will say, what about that? And I think that you are seeing that in this sort of constant introduction of new measures. So Canada definitely is playing a role there. I would say other countries have recognized that we have a certain Ukraine and Russia expertise. And so we're definitely part of the brainstorming. And, you know, watch this space. There's a lot more to come. And maybe the final thing I'll say is it's not just about government leaders at this point. The other thing that has happened, which I really welcome and encourage, is we are seeing a lot of companies stepping up and saying, I just don't want to do business with Russia anymore. And I think that's great as well.
Okay, we got time for one more. I'm going to come back to the room. So sorry to everybody on the Zoom line, but I'm going to come back to the room. David, you're going to get the last question here, CBC.
So, Minister Anand, could you tell us what is the latest on the 3,400 troops on standby? Are they ready to move on short notice? And why not move them now as suggested?
You, David. The 3,400 troops are part of the pledges that Canada makes to NATO and made to NATO in January when we were foreseeing that a further Russian invasion may indeed be possible. In addition to the 3,400 troops, we also pledged, for example, naval and some air capability. And the reality is all of that is on standby. And when the Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, as well as the NATO allies, make decisions about calling up or drawing down on those pledges, that's when they will move. They are on high readiness alert, as they must be in case our NATO organization calls upon our country in this way, but they are not moving at the current time, and we will wait until we hear from the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe in NATO to make that decision.
Follow up on a totally different question. I think this is for you, Minister Anand. Experts have said it would be illegal for foreign fighters to become fighters for Russia, so to go to Ukraine to fight for Russia, not Ukraine. Would Canada prosecute Canadians who go over to Ukraine to fight for Russia?
Well, I'll start and I'll hand the floor over to the Deputy Prime Minister. Of course, we understand Canadians' desire to join our Ukrainian friends to fight. Our role as a federal government is to ensure that we are providing accurate information to all of our citizens relating to security situations around the world. And I will take a moment to say that if there are Canadians who are interested in the armed forces, the Canadian Armed Forces is currently recruiting. And we would very much welcome applications from across the country to the Canadian Armed Forces, where we have had a training mission in Ukraine since 2015 and have trained over 33,000 Ukrainian soldiers. So I would say at this time, the legalities of the situation reflected in your question are indeterminate at this time. We need to focus on the present, and as a government, our job is to provide accurate information to Canadians, and that's exactly what we're doing and will continue to do every single day. Christia?
Okay, Anita, so I will just add, first of all, it is wonderful to have an esteemed lawyer and former law professor as our Minister of Defense in this time. I think your question was about people who fight on the Russian side. And I'm sure people know that our colleague, our Foreign Minister, Mélanie Joly, announced in Geneva this week that Canada will petition the ICC against Russia for crimes against humanity and war crimes. We are very clear that this war is illegal, and Canada will take a very appropriately severe view of anyone who is fighting this war. I do want to say something I've been hearing from Ukrainians, actually, people in the Ukrainian government, is how sorry they feel for some of the Russian recruits who are fighting there. There's a real sense that some of them are very young. Some of them didn't even know that they were, apparently, didn't know they were going into a war, didn't even know that they would be fighting in Ukraine. And I feel so sorry for them. They've really been sent into a meat grinder to support one man's, barbaric effort to undermine democracy. I feel sorry for their families. That's not the case for the architects of this war. that's not the case for people who make a voluntary choice to aid and abet this war. And then, we've been talking about the unity of Western countries, and not just Western countries, of the world's democracies in condemning Russia and supporting Ukraine. And I think there is reason to celebrate that unity. It's a really good thing. But I think in conclusion, it's worth it for all of us to remember how costly in terms of human lives, devastated families, cities, neighborhoods, this war has already been. And there is every reason to believe it's going to get worse, and a lot more people are going to die. And, we as Canadians need to brace ourselves for that. It's already been a bloodbath. I think it's going to become more of a bloodbath. I'm sure I'm not the only person who wakes up in the middle of the night just to check that Kyiv is still okay, that Kharkiv is still okay. And I think we have some terrible nights ahead. And we need to also really remember the human tragedy here, even as we celebrate the incredible strength and resilience of the people of Ukraine.
Fortunately, that's all the time we have. Thanks, everybody, for coming today. Minister, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, we are just listening to Deputy Minister Chrystia Freeland, Anita Anand, and Sean Fraser, the Immigration Minister.